Here we go. I don't think that's necessary. Yeah. There's no, we do not have a room in this whole property where we can close the door. It just doesn't work. I'm going to keep looking and find a way to do that because they have to do their work out there, whatever they're doing. Okay, here we go. A man was going down from from Jerusalem to Jericho for free. And he fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he also passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, uh, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend." What does that say to you? Pretend, if you can, that that's the first time you've ever heard it. What, what, how do you interact?
It's today.
Tell me about that. How is it today?
And, and seems to be along the way, but stop.
Yeah. Have you ever been passed by? I'm just curious. No.
No,
Yeah. Have you seen somebody passed by or known somebody passed by?
no.
Okay. What else? I mean, anything, you know, what, you're there. You are there. How does what comes out at you about this story? There's no answer. I mean, there's no right answer.
Well, the
Huh?
priest passing by. The man of God just went on by him, and the kindness of a good heart won out of the Samaritan.
Yeah. Why did the priest pass him by, I wonder? What was that? Huh?
So
What?
probably on his way to somewhere. Didn't want to take the time.
So yeah.
Wasn't a
And
good.
anybody on the screen here can also interact with that. Uh, who, what else? Why would the priest? What was more important than taking care of the guy that was all beat up and left for dead? Have you ever done that? Have you ever seen that? Yeah.
He had to go somewhere.
Like what?
And
Huh?
his own errands were more important than taking care of someone in need.
So what now?
There was a man in need, and the priest was more interested in his own problems.
Right. Okay. What could be more important than stopping to take care of the guy that was beat up?
Nothing.
Huh?
Nothing could be more important.
Right.
But he did. He went on by. Um,
Yeah, all people, the
he what now?
priest of all people would be expected to try to help him.
Yeah. The
because that's what he preached. Yeah,
right. Um,
Oh, this man was beaten and filthy and old and bleeding, and that the rest of them didn't want to get their hands dirty, and they just didn't want to get involved.
yeah,
They were afraid.
right. I, have you, has that ever happened to you in some kind of way?
Sure it has. Trying to think.
It happened to me.
What?
It's happened to me. So when I was in college,
Okay.
somebody was stealing money from the girls' dorms, from girls' bedrooms. And it turned out to be my roommate who was doing the stealing. That I found that devastating. Somehow I was young. I blamed myself for not being a better roommate, for all kinds of things, but I wanted help. So I went to the college. There was a minister. He didn't want anything to do with me because this was money and he didn't want to get into. Then I went to one school official after another. Nobody wanted to help me. Until finally I found somebody who did. It made a huge difference. Somebody who sat as school, as woman of the school who invited me in and gave me a cup of cocoa and listened to the. I just wanted. I think also my reaction at I was 19 is very different than it might have been now, but I needed help. And I blame myself for not being a better roommate. I sort of had this crazy idea that if I'd been a better roommate, my roommate would not have stolen. That's nonsense. But I needed help, and it wasn't there.
But you had nothing
I
to
had
do with
nothing.
that. I mean,
No,
you would.
I know not only nothing.
I
I was
mean, you
shocked.
would.
I
Yeah,
was totally shocked when I found. Yeah.
yeah. Um, in that case, this is Joy talking. In that case, you became the victim
I did.
in
I
a
was.
way.
Yeah.
You were the victim.
Yeah. People were associating me with my roommate. I had nothing to do with it, and nobody was saying a kind word to me or
Oh.
saying big under.
And but then the school administrators, you told me that story before, did not want to be involved in it.
Nobody wanted to be involved. I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of unclean as a girl stealing.
Yeah. Um,
Well, I remember college. All of that thing with me. And we would have people that would be whatever would happen, I don't know what would happen to them, but they would be down and out. And people would just pass them by, they didn't even go to the room,
yeah.
those things.
Who was down? I didn't get it.
People.
Oh, people. Okay.
Those people.
Yeah.
And so.
Just reading this, I see a racial ethnic element,
Yeah.
different tribes. And looks like a Levite, and I don't know what the priest was, but this was not one of theirs. So they passed him by. Whereas this Samaritan, that didn't matter to the Samaritan, which I think is obviously the big part of the story.
Who are some who are not ours today?
Oh,
Huh?
yeah. I think
Yeah.
we're hearing that in the political world, all the others,
Right.
with
Yeah.
yeah.
Who are others that you experience?
Well, a lot of us here, where we are.
The what?
A lot of us here, where we are.
Right.
That's about it.
Like what?
Well, they'll be hurting or aching or needing somebody to push them in the wheelchair or something.
Yeah.
We'll do it.
Of course, one of the big issues in this political campaign that we have not addressed very well across the board is immigration. That's one of the big thorny questions here. And Linda and I, through the years, often went during the Martin Luther King weekend, Martin Luther King week. We often went to the border. We've developed a friendship with a pastor down there who works on the border. He's got a church on the really that whole area is desert. I mean, desert like mountains and arid and cactus and all that kind of stuff. Um, and that whole thing is others. Nobody really wants to get systemically involved in it, and or we want to make it a political football. We don't want really the problem can never really fully be solved because it is so deep and endemic, but we could do a whole lot better with it than we've done all across the board. Uh, we make we make a we make a the politicians make a football out of it, and then it plays to our priestly Levitical kind of attitude here, I think. Um,
We need to
what
be,
about the victim? Put yourself there. Have you been a victim and didn't want help? I wonder. Did not want help. Uh, one of the things that occurs to me about the story is um, the victim. This is a Jewish story. The Jewish story, um, and the victim would have been Jewish. He would have been Israelite. This in Jesus' day. Um, and even the victim would have regarded the Samaritan as unclean. That was the way the others were unclean in that kind of way. And the victim himself uh, could have recoiled at being touched by a Samaritan. Uh, and but the Samaritan pushed through anyway. Um, it the story is as Betty says here, and as you all say, it's always with us. That's why I think the story, the parable, is so classic, and while it stays with us, and the language of the Good Samaritan, the phrase "the Good Samaritan," has entered the language. Somebody that does something really nice for somebody else, we talk about he or she is the Good Samaritan. Uh, the parables. I want to read another parable to you. Uh, Here we go. Which one of you, and this, what I want you to try to do is to try to hear these for the first time. If you've been to church much, you've heard many sermons on all of this stuff. But what we're trying to do is to get inside the parable and try to hear them as Jesus gave the parable and as the people who were hearing it heard it for the first time. So we want to. That's very hard to do for in our 2,000 years down the pike here, but to hear them for the first time. So okay, which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulder and rejoices. Okay, what kind of picture, what kind of idea maybe emerges from that story? Very brief little parable there, very famous from the Luke.
It's Christ with that little sheep.
Yeah, that's where the picture comes from there. That's Jesus with the lamb on his shoulder there. No, yeah, right, yeah, yeah, right,
That's what it's.
right. How has something like this impacted you in some kind of way?
Think of it as my children. And if one has a problem, you go after that one.
Yeah. Without telling anything, you've done this. Okay. Yeah.
It might be a little
and
easier if there was something in there that while looking for that, leaving the 99, looking for the one, that somebody could take his place watching the 99. It makes it, because all of us think in terms of responsibilities too. So
Yeah.
that makes it a little trickier to on that parable there.
Yeah. Um,
well, I think of it, Tubby. He, if he's there with us, something's happening to him, I'm gonna take care of him.
yeah.
And then forget about it, I guess.
Yeah. And that one can become can take over a family. Yeah. Uh, there were four of us, four boys. I'm the oldest. I never gave my parents any trouble at all. I just didn't. I never thought about it. They never knew what I was taking in school. If my dad said be home at midnight, I was home at midnight. No big deal. I didn't. Anyway, the brother next to me, 2 years younger than me, was everlasting trouble. Every day from the time he was 3 or 4 years old until he died these many years later of neglected prostate cancer. He fortunate, I mean, he outlived my father, but he did not. My mother, Mike, was always the issue. Uh, and then we have a niece who is not hopeless. I don't want to say that. Is that she's probably 58 or 60, is an alcoholic, and everybody, particularly her mother and father, tried everything in the world to help her through that, and it still doesn't work. Still does not work. Uh, but they keep trying. You keep trying to do all of that, uh, and you could translate this in a lot of ways. You could translate it to politically. We have deeply entrenched problems in this country that we simply have to stay after. We have to keep trying to find ways to deal with them. Uh, we would love always to put the sheep on our shoulder and walk home and say, "We've done that one now. That one's over." Uh, it doesn't. That does not. No. Um, I don't know what that is, but these sheep, the sheep does wander off somehow or another, uh, and then we go after that one. My mother and daddy spent a whole lot more money on my brother, bailing him out of trouble, than they ever thought about spending on me. And I didn't know any better. That was just the way we did it. That was fine. I never did, as far as I could tell, I never resented it. But that's what we did there. Uh, uh, and of course, in that world, sheep was money. Like a piece of livestock today is money. You take care of that. You do. Uh, okay, let's look at another one here. Um, this is really interesting here. What woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost." What is What hit you on that one?
Why doesn't she share?
What now?
That was the time that I realized God does answer prayer. It was just a penny for me
Okay.
when I prayed about it. And I found it.
Oh, what was lost?
Penny.
Oh, a penny. Okay. How old were you when you lost a penny? A child?
A year ago.
Huh? Oh, a year ago?
Out for me. Oh, I remember, but I remember the results.
Right. Um, first, I have done this for years and years and years and years, and reading, getting ready for this today. For the first time, I saw the word a woman. A woman had 10 pieces of silver. Now, if as Jesus was telling that story, you can be sure that everybody perked up because a woman, number one, didn't have anything. She, in most lives of that time, and unfortunately, many times today, the woman was a commodity, a commodity. Uh, and it was not unheard of, even among Jewish people, if they had too many daughters, to leave one out on the hillside to die. They just they just did that, and that was very prominent in other cultures, particularly among some of the Romans. They had too many daughters; they couldn't get them all married, so they let the baby just left right on the hillside, and she died. Uh, but it was really dramatic here for the people that Jesus was talking uh, to hear that a woman had 10 pieces of silver. Uh, would have been a fortune. I mean, that would have been a fortune for that woman. Uh, and then you wonder how she got it. You know, your imagination kicks in, and you wonder how she got 10 pieces of silver. I mean, that Jesus does not do that. Uh, but I love to read these and try to imagine what what was going on here, what was happening, um, what what I've seen through the years is, and I started working on, of course, as a preacher, you do parables. Uh, Probably 40 years ago, I began to think and began to read that a parable is more than just what we see here. Typically, we preachers, made these parables evangelistic. Uh, we and when you read a lot of times when you read the parable in their bigger context, uh, the uh, the Bible sets up the parable and then tells you, good, thank you. The parable, uh, the Bible sets up the parable and then tells you what it said, but that's not the parable. And what I try to do and what I really have done here, and we'll look at one more in a minute, is to just try to imagine with pretty good care, scholarship wise, what Jesus actually said. We've for the last couple of thousand years, particularly for the last couple of hundred years, biblical scholarship has tried to recover, tried to go back and discern, pick out what Jesus, what were the words of Jesus, what was the voice of Jesus, and what a whole group of scholars today say, and for a long time, that the parables are the nearest to the voice of Jesus. Of all of the bits and pieces that the Gospels remember about Jesus, the part that most probably was accurately from Jesus are the parables. He taught in parables. Uh, Jesus did not invent the parable. Parables is a part of snatches of some level of Hebrew scripture. That gets complicated. Um, but what Jesus did was, in his wisdom, was take these stories and elevate them to a new level, uh, because he wanted the people, the poor people to whom he spoke, to get the message. Um, uh, and then I was another piece that I was working on. Jesus was poor. He came from a poor family. They were everybody was poor. 95% of the people of Galilee were poor. They were very productive, but most of their produce or whatever they made was taken up in taxes. Either the Roman army took it or the temple took it, and most of the time, particularly in a bad year, they starved. They just starved because they didn't have anything. The temple in Jerusalem had amassed huge fortunes. People, Jews all over the world, poured money into the temple as a matter of trying to worship Yahweh, worship God. So the temple had huge amounts of gold and everything. And that's really a historical fact. But they never did redistribute it. Everybody, the temple received, but did not give back. So everybody was poor. Um, so these are stories for peasants. Jesus was a peasant talking to peasants. We have them written down, but these were oral. Jesus taught. These were oral stories. They were given orally. Also, supposition, pretty good, is that he did not just tell these one time. You have a good story and you tell it again and again and again and again. We sit around the table for a meal and start telling our stories, and then I'll say, "Did I tell? I already told you that." Uh, and so, for the last several years, I have fallen into the thing of saying, "Now I may have told you this one, but I'm gonna do it again." Okay, I'm gonna tell you again. It's two stories. The story is too good just to tell one time, so we're going to tell it again. And so, probably these stories were told again and again, and that's part of the reason that you get some of the same story in all four of the gospels, or certainly all three of the synoptic gospels, but they be slightly different because he told them at different times in different ways. But a woman had 10 pieces of silver and lost one, and she would turn the house upside down until she found it. Uh, the thing that is so fascinating is that the parables are not, um, they don't have an answer. There's no, there is no one answer for a parable. When I was in seminary back in the 60s, a part of what they wanted us to do was to read the parable and find what the parable was all about. But the scholarship that has advanced across the last 50, 60 years is to say the parables are open-ended. And what I'm trying to do for myself and for us is to find ourselves in the parable. Not what was Jesus saying or whatever, but what do they strike in you and me? What kind of chord? What kind of possibilities? What kind of sense of failure? You know, we've all passed by. When Linda and I would be driving somewhere, and a few times in our driving, we would come upon a wreck. Somebody out here had a fender bender, and the police were motioning us on, and I would go on by. And Linda said, "You need to stop." Now, why do I need to stop? The police are there, the ambulance is there, but she really had a thing about wanting me to stop. And I never did. I just never did. Uh, we did come upon one wreck, and it had just happened, and the wheels were still spinning, and we did get out, and we wound up helping the guy. And what we said a while ago, we helped him. In those days, you didn't have 911. We put him in the car. We took him to the nearest hospital. hospital 15, 20 miles away. Messed up our whole afternoon. But not just us. Linda's daddy was in the car with us also. So we didn't pass by. We
Feel good too.
Right, yeah, right. Uh, he was badly hurt, and whether he died or not, I don't know. But he was pretty. The guy was pretty well banged up. Uh, but we stopped and we did all. But I would go on by. I wouldn't go stop at the wreck. I guess if we had that one time we came upon the wreck, that had just happened. It really, the dust was still floating around and the wheels were still spinning. Uh, and it was a little two-lane highway. It wasn't an interstate. We didn't have interstate. Uh, but to go on by uh, is a real temptation to do that. I don't want to be bothered. Uh, and I always tried to stop. I mean, I tried. I think the parable pricked my conscience, even as a minister. And even though I was trying to finish the sermon, it was going to be Sunday morning at 11 o'clock before I was through with the sermon. Uh, and if one of my kids needed me or if the phone call came or something, I think I made an effort to stop and hoped that the sermon or whatever else I was doing would have finally kind of come together for me. Uh, but anyway, that's, we all have those kinds of struggles like that. Uh, the Another story that has stuck with me all of these years painfully. I was in my first church in Vienna, Georgia, down South Georgia, and we got a new car. We got a new station wagon. I don't know why we did it. We didn't need that big car, but it was a beautiful dark green station wagon. And Alan, I mean, Stan will remember the back, the tailgate went up in the roof. Somehow they were really fancy. Uh, and so, and the parsonage was on the street there. Uh, and I was out in front of the house one afternoon washing the car. Uh, and a black lady that lived down the street in Vienna, you live next door to each other. She lived down the street. And I knew her, and she was up and down the street all the time. And she stopped, and the back end of the car was open. Back end of that new station wagon, brand new station wagon, was open. And she looked at it and she said, "Oh, Reverend, what a pretty car." And I said, "Thank you. It is. Thank you very much." And then she said, "I could sure use that car to haul some firewood." And I thought to myself, no way. I am not going to mess up the back end of my brand new carpeted station wagon with firewood. I just said, well, I don't know how I turned her off. I just said, thank you, no. I mean, I didn't. She she would have been surprised if I had said, yeah, let's load it up. But anyway, it was a real startling thing. Of course, within a few weeks, the car was all messed up. We had two kids, and they were spilled Coke and whatever else in the car. And I was talking with a friend the other day, and I said, for all of these 60 years, I have wished that woman would come back so I could put her firewood in the back of my car. Uh, and it's just one of those little things that has stayed with me. And I hope I've learned a lot from it. That 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 some things are important, and if you needed firewood, let's stop and do that. Uh, there's another great story that has stayed with me also all these years along this same line. Albert Camus was a great French novelist, wrote during in this World War II ended. And one of the really great books that he wrote is entitled The Fall, Fall, The Fall. Uh, and the stories, really involved. But in the book, he tells the story. In the story, he's talking to somebody, and And the narrator is saying, I was crossing the Seine River at night, bridges all across the Seine. And as I walked across the bridge, I saw a young woman standing on the bridge, leaning over the edge of the wall there, looking into the river. And I walked on by. I didn't stop. I walked on by. And then in the narration, he says, I got across the bridge and then I heard a splash and a scream. The young woman had jumped into the river. And then he says, and then the story goes on and on. And then the narrator says, I have often said, young woman, please jump into that river again and give me a second chance to save you, really to save us both. But then the story concludes by saying, but it's too late. It's always too late, fortunately. Fortunately. And again, that is the story of the firewood for me. To try, of course. What?
You mentioned green car.
Right.
We don't have them like that.
You don't have what?
No,
Well, no. We had a beautiful green Chevrolet station wagon in 1966 or 7. Right, we did. And the back end popped, the back end rolled up into the roof somehow. I know it maybe went back. Anyway, the gate disappeared. Might have gone down underneath anyway. So yeah, you're right. We don't have green cars, but and this is how the parables speak to me in this kind of setting here. Speaks to me, and so through the years when I have tried to talk about a parable or preach from a parable, I've tried to get to the heart of it. And because what happened is as the different gospel writers took these stories, they edited, or the developing Jesus group edited those and closed them off. What the churches have always done has made these evangelistic stories, that the lost is not the coin, the lost is somebody's soul salvation. And the lost sheep is not a sheep, it's somebody, which is perfectly legitimate as a way to get to the story, but that's not the way it was told. Another piece that I read, Jesus was a peasant and he talked to peasants. He didn't, these were not written, it was all oral, talked, spoken. Um, a peasant talking with peasant. But then I am reminded, never underestimate the wisdom of a peasant, of a poor person. Um, um, Linda's mother was not anything but a peasant, but she didn't go to college. But Linda's mother was one of the wisest people I've ever known. And as I've said many times, um, she had a saying for everything, and we never knew whether it was a proverb or Shakespeare or South Georgia. We never knew which one it was, but they always made sense. Like sometimes you step on your toe to stop the toothache, or you can't make jelly in the kitchen while rocking on the front porch. And things without remedy are things without regard. And somebody that makes a big mistake of their lives, she would say, well, he drove his ducks to a bad market. So don't ever discount the wisdom. Even they may not know Greek and Hebrew, but there's a lot of wisdom in just among us. Just all kinds of easy wisdom there.
It's like when back in the biblical times. That was the way it was.
So what now?
Back in the biblical times.
Right, yeah.
That's the way it was. Because it didn't make sense then. It's like,
Yeah. And you listen to that kind of thing, and so much of the Bible itself is that kind of wisdom, is just the kind of stuff that makes sense, and we need to listen to that, and I've always tried to do that. Okay, let's uh, um, look at this other one here for just a minute. Um, One of the favorite books that I've read of a book on the parables, it's called Hear Then the Parable. Uh, and the writer, Dr. Scott, says, how do you title a parable? And sometimes the title we give the parable uh, limits what we're trying to get out of the parable. And so the story here, we've always called it the story of the prodigal son. Dr. Scott says when he talks about a parable, when he writes about a parable, his title is the first line of the parable. So he doesn't give it a title. So here he does not call this the story of the prodigal son. The title he gives it, there was a man who had two sons. So that leaves it wide open. There was a man who had two sons. Uh, it, I'm not going to try to read the whole thing. It's too much. You could take it with you and read it there. That when I was in college, uh, I grew up in a very friendly Baptist church over here in Clarkston. Frankly, the preachers were forgettable. We never we never did have a good preacher that I could listen to. We kids always knew that the sermon was almost over when the preacher closed his Bible. We knew that we were about to be able to get out of there when the preacher closed the Bible. And so that was just we knew that we could be leaving pretty soon. Uh, but when I was in college, I went to a great church, and in my life I've known two or three great preachers, and my college pastor was one of those. And he preached one Sunday. He preached a sermon from this, and the title of it was "Life in a Faraway Country." The prodigal goes off to a faraway country, and then Charles struck a chord there, and he preached about 8 or 9 sermons Sunday after Sunday from this story here. And a lot of us remember this. And he was pivotal to me as a kid. I was 18 years old, going to church. First time ever a preacher really caught my attention. Uh, Several years ago, I got word that Dr. Welburn was quite ill, quite ill. He had a very illustrious career and had been a scholar and a bunch of stuff. And I was able to track him down. I had a friend as a friend and a friend. So I called him and I told him who I was, and he remembered. Uh, when I said this is Bob Maddox, he had some memory of it. And I said, Dr. Welburn, I want to thank you again for those sermons you did from the prodigal son. And he laughed and he said, you guys, 60 years now, that's about all you remember about me. And they were so prescient here, so revealing. And Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, we found ourselves as kids, or I did, in the parable. Uh, and all of those have big effect on me to approach these with as open-ended as I can become. There's not another the two parables that are so important, I think, is the Good Samaritan. As we say, a man going down was on a road going to Jericho. That one is so rich. You can just go in many directions with that. And also the story here of the man who had two sons. You can just go and go, and and the challenge is to find yourself in these parables. What kind of mirror uh, to your own personality and soul and pains and joys do you find in these stories of Jesus? Uh, I can deal with a lot of other theological stuff, but the parables are consistently arresting to me, particularly the Lucan parables. Luke tells the stories with not much of a preface. Uh, he, he he doesn't want to give away. He does not want to close off the parable from our interaction with the parable, with the story. And it's the same with any great story, short or long. Uh, what is so arresting is you find yourself there. Uh, Another scholar that has been very important to me is a guy named Robert Funk. And he says the story takes you somewhere. Uh, the story is always over there, but it's also here, you know, that double loop there, but it is never just here. The story, particularly of these great ones, of the man who had two sons and the man on the road to Jericho, go on and on and on, and you never get done with that. You never can mine all of that of the stuff that's in these parables. And that is, I think, as much as anything else, the genius of Jesus. That Jesus had the great capacity to tell these stories to his own time. He didn't know he was telling it to us in 2024, but the stories, the parables to us are these parables to me, I should say, are as fresh as I think they were to the folks who heard them for the first time. Uh, so, particularly with Luke, Luke wants to get the story to everybody. He does not limit. Uh, and when you read the parables themselves, God is never mentioned in these parables. The word God is not there. These stories are completely open ended and they become religious as you and I become religious with them, something like that. You find yourself, you find your own meaning in these parables. Uh, and and the really great books about the parables, one of the things that they want us always to understand is you don't ever get done with them. You're never through with them. As often as you read them, you find something new. And that's the way it is with all great literature. You read the story again and again, and you'll say, I read this thing 3 times, and that's the first time I saw it. I have preached how many times from Luke 15, and the other day working on this, the first time I noticed that it was a woman who had 10 pieces of silver. A woman, and this is incredibly important from Luke to say a woman had 10 pieces of silver. So that's kind of the parables. It's just go on and on and on. I've got some notes here that I'll give you that you can read some other time. I didn't want to talk about the parables until you had a chance to look at the parable. I did not want to tip my hand at them uh, before you had a chance to do what I'm trying to do, which is to see how open-ended they are and what they say to you. In fact, any sermon of its worth uh, is talking to you. Another great wisdom that came from a professor a long time ago to a group of preachers. He said, if you're working with a text, if you're, you in the lectionary, you're supposed to maybe to preach from such and such next Sunday. You work with that piece of scripture, and if it does not speak to you, find something else to talk about. You can come back to that 4 or 5 weeks later. That it needs to interpret us. The Bible, any great piece of literature, is designed to interpret us, to invite us to enter into it. Okay? Thank you all very much.